to everyone. I think we may have some folks overseas that are putting in some long hours, so thank you for that. My name is Greg Olson. I'm the Program Operations Division Director in the Office of Food for Peace. I've had the privilege of working with just about everybody at the table for quite a while on these issues, so I wanted to send my thanks to the TOPS team for kind of forcing this issue a little bit, for the FAQR team that's represented here for also pitching in on their part, and to Save the Children for hosting today. I think this is a good opportunity at a good time to talk about a process that, to be completely honest, in my opinion, doesn't really do what it needs to do. When I first saw this document, I've been with the office for a while, this is just not something that you need to use or should be using in a fast-paced environment where, you know, people's lives could potentially be affected by this. You need something quick and easy that can get the job done on the ground. In my opinion, the documents that were shared and that have been around for a long time.
You want to check if people can hear you?
Yeah.
People are writing in. They can hear.
Okay.
Okay.
So in my opinion, this thing, it kind of misses the most important point of all, is what do people need to do on the ground right now when something has been spotted that's a potential food safety issue. Food quality issue, we can, stage 2, but there's really virtually no guidance on what partners are supposed to do, knowing that many of us now have food technologists on staff, people who can provide some of that guidance. That would be the first thing I'd want to change with this, is to be able to provide some guidance to partners, like these are the signs of things that you need to be looking for in advance of having any speculation that something's wrong. My second big observation is that it is way too focused on the bureaucratic side here in Washington about the steps we have to go through and what we should be doing. Plenty of guidance and process on that, but not a lot for that upfront side, the very critical part of identifying that there's an issue. I know from firsthand experience talking with many of the PVO partners that this form is just not user-friendly enough, if user-friendly at all. Way too complicated. It's hard to understand what kind of question you're even being asked and what kind of your response is supposed to be. So I really think a revamp of this whole process is what we're starting with right now, that it's not just Food for Peace driving this, which I think that's honestly how this original one came about. It should be reverse engineered. It should start in the field, in the warehouses, at the distribution sites, and work its way backwards is what I would prefer we do. And I know that the TOPS folks have put some work into some ideas. I know that FAQR has put some work into this. We're working on kind of more of a losses damages report, which really doesn't get at the core of what this is, but it kind of feeds into that same process. What I would like to see, and this is years down the road, is there is some kind of internet-based system with a hard copy system behind that for places that don't have connectivity, that this all can be much more real-time to take a lot of that pressure off. Like, it's going to take me 2 days to let Washington even know what's going on. If there was an IT system put into place, and that is a big barrier when you're talking government and IT. It'll take years to get to that point. But I think that's where I would like to kind of point this is, it's been this paper-based process that's proven itself not to be the most user-friendly or the most functional even, and kind of do a wholesale change based off of everybody's collective experience of knowing intuitively what needs to happen and being able to put some process and some structure behind that. So those were the kind of opening comments that I wanted to throw out there, and I know that there's some folks online that are probably going to have some perspectives on this, and I would welcome that. I think what may be a good next step is to maybe identify a small informal working group just to gather ideas and kind of compare notes and formats and templates and come up with something that works for the entire group and isn't just developed out of Washington and, to be honest, doesn't really work so well for us when it comes in, if it comes in at all. I can't remember the last time, to be honest, I saw one of these forms come in, filled out even halfway. It's not working. And given the impacts that some of these issues can have, they don't happen often. Thankfully, everyone's doing a good job of managing things. But when they do happen, you can't be reactive. You have to be out in front of it. There has to be a process and a system that's easy to use and can be used quickly to stop distributions or at least get some sampling and testing done first step. That's where things should, in my opinion, should be started. So I don't know if anyone has any other observations, questions? We can kind of...
I mean, people like us who have worked in the field for many years, we have had issues once in a while. Either we ourselves had or we know of people who have had issues. But in the last few years, when we have been going around doing this community management training in many, many countries, the common observation was the field staff who are dealing with these communities on a daily basis, either they do not know about this mechanism that it exists, or even if they heard about it, they are not using it. And we found it very surprising that they are dealing with the issues, but they are not taking advantage of the mechanism that was instituted to address those issues. Now, when people report back about the quality issues, it helps Food for Peace address the issue at this level, but also it helps at the field level ultimately. So I see Hassan Ben Baha, he's from CRS. He is online. He has worked in East Africa, now he is in West Africa. He has got experience from multiple countries. Hassan, can you give us some background of why people are not using this mechanism, the community feedback loop, and how we can simplify it so that people can start using it? Hassan.
May not be able to, might be muted.
But he said volume, so I don't know whether.
Huh?
I think
He
it's...
said volume.
Oh.
So Adrian's saying that the volume is turned off for them, so they're only able to type.
Oh,
So
so maybe he can,
if
I mean,
he's able
yeah,
to type
yeah.
a response.
Okay, so Hassan, can you type your response? I think. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's been turned off.
so I don't know if you want to tell them by,
You can actually write it on.
write a note to them saying that they can't.
I see how easy it is to turn on.
I can see the
We can
microphone.
instruct them to how to turn on their microphone. So we'll go ahead and do that.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
we'll see if it
Right.
goes through. But if not, then we'll just use the chat box.
Okay.
So hi everyone. So you should be able to see a a telephone icon actually up top. And if you click on that, you can connect your audio. And it should give you an option for dialing into the audio conference or using your microphone. And so let's go ahead and choose using microphone. And then click join. Let's see if people are able to do that. And you can type in the chat box if you're having problems. So we can give the
Well, how comes in, can I pitch in from my perspective while he comes?
Yeah,
or shall we
that's a
wait,
good
or-
idea.
Sure.
Or shall we wait until Hassan comes by?
Right.
So,
In the interim, while this is getting fixed, Sajid will maybe make a couple of comments.
Right, so hang in there, and we're working to see that we can't get you some two-way communication here. But meanwhile, the people in the room here will continue some of the discussion. So continue listening, and then when you can join in, we'll we'll have all of you then. Good, Eve.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind ourselves that this issue has come up, especially when we had three incident of CSB. Remember way back when it turned blue?
Green.
Green. And also in Burkina Faso it turned gray for I don't know what reason.
Different fungus.
Yep,
No,
different
it had no
fungus. But
fungus.
no, it was not fungus.
No,
it was like
fortification.
fortification. However, what I have noticed is that our field staff at the front line, at the distribution side, or at the warehouse also, they need to really learn or understand the importance of this feedback. Not necessarily to inform or keep the USAID informed, but also at some point reconcile with their DMCR report, because this could be treated as undistributed, not fit for consumption.
Right.
So if we do not record or have something documented, to report what's happening so that Food for Peace can have an assessment of what is the trend, what kind of commodity we are often getting these kind of responses that is not fit for distribution. Another is, as you have mentioned, very important is the safety issue. I mean, we cannot really distribute something without being sure about the safety of consumption of that commodity. So we have to be very proactive to monitor that. And also when we document this thing, we have this information will also reconcile with our report in the DMCR or loss adjustment. So there are multiple functions out there and reason for the importance of this. But of course, the primary is to keep informed that, oh, wait a minute, we are getting some commodity which is, we suspect at this time not fit for consumption until it is what you call lab test is done.
Yeah.
The other one important thing is that we also have to, that's what I advocate, and we have to be very important to track BUBD. I always get confused with that. BUBD in line with first in, first out.
Right.
And that we have tried to introduce in many country offices, that we got to have a sort of a tracking system of which one should go out first and which one next, and so on and so forth. And that's one reason we also advocate to have a shipment number, because based on the shipment number that comes in first, we can track, and of course the bill of lading is there. So there are multiple reasons to really enforce the importance of this, what you call this feedback loop.
So something that we've been looking into for a while now is use of some kind of barcoding down to the bag level, down to the vegetable oil box level, that would help with some of those things. Now that's a ways out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of the direction that, to me, this is integrating all of these issues into better supply chain management, that you have visibility into all aspects of this. Second thought was, I think after we all kind of agree on why things aren't working as well as they should be and have a clearer way forward, a process mapping exercise that includes that losses and damages side, that includes the notification to Washington side, that includes something on, these are the types of protocols that need to be used for sampling and testing. You know, you can't do this yourself. You have to go to a third party. In certain countries, you have to get a Ministry of Health involved. You know, like, then it gets very complicated around different countries have different requirements. But I think that process mapping exercise to making sure that this is hitting on all points, because right now it doesn't. It's just really like, here's what you need to know, Washington. That's really what I see this serving as. So there's definitely some good parts to this, but I think it's a little too narrowly focused for what is the bigger picture, especially up front, and for the connections back to, you know, how do
I think that they've got it.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, the feedback is there.
Feedback loop right there.
But there's another issue that we need to keep in mind, which we can discuss later on, is that we have to recognize the fact there's lead and sub. Lead, usually they receive food, they store it, and sometime in some occasion they give it to the sub who have got a warehouse. But for example, in Mali, in Ubale program in, not Mali, Malawi, CRS is the lead, and we, Save the Children is the sub, and we don't manage any warehouse. So the food is delivered to the distribution site by CRS, which is fine. But sometimes some bags are delivered at the distribution site in a reconstituted bag. That can pose a challenge. That's why I'm saying we should keep a note of these kind of a situation. How do we then identify which shipment number, which, unless they provide when they do. So we need to make sure that they provide with all those detailed information so that when we receive a commodity at the distribution side in a reconstituted bag, which is may not have the same information, we can take it from the weigh bill to say that this is a shipment number, bill of lading, and this is the commodity, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Again, I think a process mapping exercise that could take that into
account
for these kind of hopefully rare circumstances where you are getting a reconstituted bag and there's no contract number on it. How are you supposed to handle that? That's kind of the overall point in this is you can't have to you're not going to figure out how to do that quickly enough in the middle of one of these circumstances. There has to be something in place. For those that know that Food for Peace and OFTA are now co-located in the same building, some of that OFTA DNA is starting to wear off on at least me at least, where I'm like, I'm really starting to think more about the structure and the plan up front that you cannot be reactive to this. By that time, it's way too late. Something bad is going to happen. So I think it's kind of a change in mindset, at least inside the office, as well as how we think about things. And it's not just, hey, I'm getting this report from the field that says there's something bad going on. There needs to be a much more, broadly focused process to kind of think through all those things.
And the other suggestion is that, like, whenever a new program is starting, they have the inception workshop. There are a lot of issues covered in that inception workshop. One thing could be included in that agenda is how to deal with any issues with commodity quality.
And thank you for the great lead-in. I just wrote down that comment that maybe we can get our food technologists or a group of food technologists that work for all the organizations to come up with some module that fits into the TOPS training. Like this is what food quality and food safety is and what it means and what it does. And here are some of the warning signs when things are not going the way that we'd wanted to, that those storekeepers in the warehouse are able to kind of, keep an eye on things a little bit more. I think the more people are aware that there are food quality and safety parameters of things that you can look for, the easier it'll be and the faster they'll be able to report things and spot them and move around on, the notification side of who needs to do what. So that may be something we think about for the next version of, whatever may be coming our way on whatever TOPS turns into. I know that there's not a lot of room right now to make any changes, but I think that would be something that we would, want to think about longer term of getting, now that, we've had that expertise in the office for a few years now, of being able to push out that expertise down to the field level and say, like, hey, from our perspective, these are the kinds of things that we would like people to be educated on and know what they mean and how to respond to them. And it's not just, you send in your report and you really have no idea what the implications are of what's going on before it's been
And there's
tested.
no feedback back to the organization. If you have a problem, you don't know what happens once that information goes back.
That's something else I noticed in the
so
process.
So there's no feedback in that sense to close the loop. This has been addressed or whatever.
Yeah. One of my other observations when I was looking through this yesterday was the current process, really, there's too many kind of back and forth points. Partners are supposed to notify us, and we're supposed to notify partner headquarters, like that. It just doesn't, I mean, I understand why it was done that way, but it doesn't really get to the point of what needs to happen quickly enough.
To catch up with the modern system.
But one quick suggestion. Normally when we try to introduce some new things like this, which is not known or specified in Code of Federal Regulation, because we normally go and introduce Code of Federal Regulation and the practitioners come back and say, okay, where did you find that? And we go like, oh, it's not there. My suggestion would be something important like this could come out as a circular, official circular from that this is a part of the responsibility that fits into CFR.
FFPIB.
Yeah, and that fits into CFR 211.5, which is the responsibility of the cooperating sponsor. Though it is not mentioned in the Code of Federal Regulation, but that circular could become like official instruction that would be in line with the CFR 2.5.
Right.
So, I mean, we can say that. This is it.
The other option is to actually write something into the agreements. That says,
That's another
this
thing,
is-
yeah.
This is part of our
It
policy.
needs to get
Exactly.
incentivized in that,
Right.
in that
There
way.
you go.
Yeah, I mean, like notifying people about what's going on is pretty
Perfect.
easy. It's not really effective in my opinion most of the time. Some passive food for peace information bulletin that gets sent out that, to be honest,
Right.
half the people in the office aren't even reading those things.
Yeah.
So that's where I think it's really like hands, boots on the ground, touching, talking to people is a much more effective way to get this out. That there are not an overwhelming number of food for peace development programs around the world. This is a pretty small knit group, a pretty well known group that I think it's probably more effective to do some kind of word of mouth, something like this, where we're sending that message out. So I think we can.
Just as a side issue, in October we are having the Asia Regional Knowledge Sharing Meeting in Bangkok. Now in Asia, out of all the countries, Bangladesh is the only LAPSA program that uses food. The rest of the countries are primarily using either cash or WP food. So we are trying to get someone from the WP's regional food quality and safety office to come and talk about the issues that they have faced in Asia region with food quality and how are they handling those issues.
So my experience has been it's sometimes get somebody from one of those regional offices. We may have better luck going to headquarters and talking to Isabel directly. That
Isabel is the one who connected me.
Yes, well, yeah. In advance, everybody, we can do it. I know that they've shuffled some people around, and it's sometimes hard to get on their calendars because they're focused on so much now. But I think, after some rekindled connections with WFP headquarters, I think she's definitely the one to contact first. And here's what we're thinking. I don't think it really matters who they send. It's just someone from their perspective to come and talk about these things. So
I'm not sure if Hassan has been able to activate his microphone. I would like to hear from him. Laura, can you?
Yeah, Hassan, have you been able to connect your audio?
Well, I'll say that any feedback that anybody has here on the phone, colleagues, that feel free to send that to me. I'll be more than happy to most likely find somebody to help facilitate that process. And then maybe, in the fall, before this meeting in Bangkok, we can kind of regroup and put some ideas together to say, here's kind of the consensus around what all the stakeholders are thinking. I can get USDA involved, and that's really more for just the traceability aspect of this. Their contract ends at U.S. load port. It's very difficult to do anything back to suppliers. There is a bit of a change in that, but it's going to be really difficult. But I think just so there's the whole process has been mapped out. Everyone's been involved. Everyone's had a chance to put forward their ideas. I don't think this is going to be a hard one to solve. I think that there's going to be consensus around a few ideas that work and work quickly. And how we divide things up is probably going to be the next step. One of my thoughts was we have something that's issued to implementing partners and field staff. This is what you need to do. You don't need to worry so much about what happens in Washington to make that thing a little bit easier to understand and to respond to. There's then a second piece that is kind of the Washington side of if we need to consult with USDA and FDA and everybody else. And then there's some kind of connection between those people so people understand that they're not isolated, that we in Washington are basically following the field's lead. We're following up on all those things and working it through just to make this a little easier to use. That was the initial question that I think either BK or Adib was trying to get at, is it's not used, and I wrote down, well, why? We have to know why. I don't want to speculate. I have my own ideas, the things that I've been told, but I definitely want a much wider set of opinions on why the current process and the current documentation is or isn't used, is liked or is not liked. You know, I don't want to assume anything on this, that it's really the input from the partners, the people who matter in this, that are driving this process, and it's not Food for Peace Washington kind of working at the opposite direction, which I think is kind of led us to where we are now. That I know, if, having just been in Uganda for a week, going from warehouse to warehouse with WFP, if somebody handed me this, I was like, I'm just going to go around that process right away, to be honest. I mean, it's not going to serve anybody well.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, this was developed a while ago,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the whole system has changed
Just
so much.
looking at the acronyms inside of that,
Right.
Clearly,
Yeah,
you
you
know,
don't even have half the
AOTRs, and there's
Right.
parts of Food for Peace divisions and teams that don't exist anymore.
So does it make sense to, does it make sense to teach the people how to use this, or does it make sense to do more of this process kind of?
There are two things out here. When we go
Yeah.
from headquarters and try to,
Right.
what you call, educate our practitioners in the country office, there are two things. One is good enough practices.
Right.
I mean, they have to use their judgment to do it this way or that way. Another is requirement.
Right.
I mean, you have to do it. So this should be introduced like others, that come what may, this need to be, it's a part of the USG requirement. Yeah, requirement. The moment we say that it's a requirement, it becomes like part of the other reporting process.
Well, but this is very hard to actually, even, you would want them to use a system, but maybe pushing the system as it currently is right now. You want to raise people's awareness, obviously.
I would say, from a perspective of someone who probably has not seen this or used this, it may be good for them to look it over and figure out, like, here's where we're at now. Right. And everybody can kind of agree that this is not the ideal process, but to know what the starting point is,
and give us
rather than to have, no kind of benchmark of what we're trying to fix, correct, to make more efficient is probably not a bad idea.
So maybe using it as a way to do that process. Now, maybe I don't know about the thing in October, but maybe there's a way to do it sooner.
October will not be the forum to do all this, but what I'm thinking is that we can do is probably do a sort of a stakeholder consultation type. Because we are not able to hear a lot of people who are on the line.
Right.
And I know there are many more people who can contribute to this process. So two things we would like to get from that, the community. One is, why are they not using it? And if it is too cumbersome, how can we simplify it, make it more user-friendly? And let it come from the community. Then the ownership will be probably much more, because this was top-down.
Well, I think it's kind of died a slow death because nobody found it very useful or practical, and
most people don't even know about it.
Well, and it's been long enough since it's been really used that I'm sure staff turnover and new people coming in that aren't aware of it. So I think that's the biggest message in all of this, is we need to come up with a process to enable, the reporting to flow through to where it needs to, and to take steps to ensure that nothing gets distributed that hasn't been, tested or sampled when there are concerns, things like that. That it's just, this is something as a community we need to focus on. Whatever the process, whatever the documentation, whatever the system looks like, we'll figure that out. But it's just getting that message out there that, like, this is a pretty important part of it. Thankfully, it doesn't happen a lot where we have reports of serious issues, but there have been some. I was working at WFP at the time, and I remember the office director would just yell. Like, if anybody says green and CSV together, you were going to get yelled at. So, it's pretty easy to understand how a lot of those things, they kind of take on a life of their own. They get maybe a little blown out of proportion because there isn't a strong enough system for people to rely on to know what's happening, that they make the worst assumption right away. Something bad's going to happen if there's a better understanding of the problem.
But there is another side to it. To us sitting here, it may look like they are overreacting. But those who are at the front end, they're dealing with the government, the local
Exactly.
The government.
So it's kind of the converse between here and what needs to happen in the field. And in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, that it's really the field warehousing
Mhm.
distribution side is where the focus needs to be placed.
Mhm.
They're the ones who are kind of at the front line of dealing with this stuff. And, obviously I care sitting back and watching what's going on, but I am not the first one who needs to be looped into this process. A decision needs to be made on the ground. Is this a food quality issue? Is it a food safety
Right.
issue? What do I do?
Checklist or something
Yeah,
that would.
it shouldn't have to go through 2 days of approvals to
Right.
Washington, then, if you get the
Right.
weekend or holiday or something, I don't want to necessarily hold up somebody from doing a distribution that doesn't need to happen, or I definitely do if there's a concern, and it's just a matter of time
Right.
of somebody thinking they have to get approval from us to do so. That to me seems a little short-sighted in how it should work.
But I would stress upon giving importance of quality equal to safety also.
Mhm.
Because in the field, in the middle of nowhere, even if it is safe enough to consume it, but because of the quality issues,
Yeah, they're not going to eat it.
and they can also misunderstand and report back, because we got to recognize the fact there are a lot of media people, local press
Right,
media
right,
people, they
right.
look for these kind of things, look
Yeah.
what's happening. So we need to also work on the quality, because what happened with CSP, it was good to consume, but because it changed the color,
Right.
people were like, and there was an issue out
And
there.
it took a very long
so we
time
have-
for that
yeah,
to.
And
Yeah.
it was a
back
very
again.
large amount.
Yeah, it was a huge,
Right.
large, all over.
Right.
So we need to stress upon both quality and safety so that,
So,
I would let the food technologists
Mhm.
kind of, food
Leave that
scientists
on.
figure us. I agree.
Yeah.
They both need to be focused. I have a feeling they might take separate paths inside
Right,
the
right, right,
process.
well, you
That
can,
if a food
Yeah.
safety issue has been identified,
that is.
full stop.
exactly.
Food quality issue,
Let's
it's still going to
figure
go
it out.
through
Exactly,
a
some
process to
process.
figure it out.
Right.
But, yeah.
I can commit myself to come up with some feedback, because I'm going to Malawi and they have already raised this issue of how to handle this thing, and this is the perfect time. So I can go through some of these processes and then see what they say. That's from Malawi. I mean, that's one country.
Are they still distributing?
Yeah.
WFP or?
No. It's
Right.
statutory.
So,
Yeah.
TCI and all of
PCI
that?
finished.
Because they
PCI has
finished
finished.
distribution,
Yeah,
PCI finished,
PCI,
okay.
PCI
is still-
PRS is-
So the last thing that I noticed, or at least I noted down in reading through this, is sometimes the roles and responsibilities inside this process are not very clear. What do you mean when you say a surveyor or an inspection company? Like, it needs to be much more explicit of who's doing what. Because without that, you're going to have either nothing being done because somebody thought someone else was doing it, or two
Right.
people doing the same thing, which
Right.
just slows down the process. So that was something else I would focus on, is being very clear on who is responsible for what.
Right.
We
Yeah.
do that because there are two aspects. One is that it's a transit ocean carrier that the surveyor is going to report back. But once we take the possession, surveyors are off the hook, and now we have to do that part of the responsibility to
Yeah.
verify, validate, and all report.
So, Mark, you had?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to ask, in looking at designing, redesigning the system, making it, as you say, but process mapping and also making it more efficient and effective, is there a role, speaking of roles, is there a role for the local mission? I mean, is there a more proactive role for a Food for Peace person from the mission to be
There
involved?
absolutely should be.
Absolutely.
I mean, there should be, I
Absolutely.
would think.
But that's,
Yeah.
that's
And
part
there-
of the process.
And so
mapping.
what happens so often in the missions, of course, is that it's pretty good turnover all the time. And so, as you say, if someone knows about it, someone else comes in and they're under pressure, overworked is typically, someone may not know that.
Well, they're not going to be the one to make the decision about
No.
what to, but they have to know what's
They need
going
to be
on,
informed.
because
They're gonna have
Because
to
the
deal,
partners will reach
they're
out to
gonna have to
them.
deal with the
Right.
ministries of health and
if
everything.
somebody inside that host government comes to the mission director or the ambassador and has an issue, they're totally blindsided.
Yeah.
Not good. If we can go to, what is it, the step 7, 8, and 9 page of the complex timeline. What kind of caught my eye in this one is under step 8, where it's talking about Food for Peace senior officials. Well, who is that senior? It's not,
Yeah, and,
and it gets worse. Collaborating with USDA, who at USDA,
Right.
and experts. That
Right.
was kind of what I'm after. Like,
Absolutely.
I would have no clue if I was on the ground reading this about what that meant.
Right.
And thankfully, that's probably
Well,
a
this
Food for
is
Peace
the
role in
tool for
Washington
getting
to
the
do it, but
information.
right.
it's just that kind of generalization
Right.
inside of what is a very exhaustive process. It's sending mixed messages. They like this, what seemingly is a very thorough, well thought out process, but when I get into the details of it, very quickly I find out that I'm not able to really follow the rest of the steps through there. So that was kind of the roles and responsibilities, is the terminology that's used, and have those people who are under that role been aware that they're going to be contacted about things, and there needs to be a little bit more of a
And also,
coordination.
when you do it at this level, at a headquarter level, you may map out the entire thing, but you don't have to give the entire thing to the field level.
No.
Give them only
Yes.
the right size that they can
Well,
take.
only the stuff that affects them.
I would
on
still
that
give
part.
them, this is the entire process. Here's the part that you need to focus on. Here's the part that
Exactly.
connects it, and here's the part that we do here to make sure all those things happen. And that was kind of my two-part, or at least a connected process. That it's, you don't have to read through every step in this for the storekeeper in the warehouse that said, I have, green mold growing on my CSV.
Right.
What do I do? You don't really care about what Washington needs to do, to be honest.
But they do ask the question, what happens on,
Right.
when,
So, and
so
you-
that's
they
why
need
you
to
can.
know
that's
that
the
they're going to get
connection.
the feedback back.
Yeah,
Exactly.
in my opinion, the primary focus should be giving instructions or having somebody that knows what to do in that situation,
Right.
and having the cover to say, yes, I halted distribution
Yeah.
because Food for Peace said, in these circumstances, this is what they're willing to,
Right. Exactly.
I don't, nobody, it's not going to be me. Food technologists, nutritionists, whomever, doesn't need to give an approval to stop distribution where it's at right now because this kind of thing has been noticed.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure there's some threshold issues that Rufino or somebody else can put forward. It's like, when you see this, full stop, no doubt about it, we are willing to halt distribution for a few days at least in
Until
the
this
grand
is
scheme of
resolved.
things. From my perspective, a few days isn't a big deal. I know that's different for the field folks, that if you have an ongoing distribution and it's suddenly been stopped and there's ramifications with the local government and the beneficiary, it's a bigger deal. But we have to find some way
It
to...
is better to deal with those issues.
Oh, no, absolutely.
You'd rather be cautious.
Yeah.
No,
Everybody was
my
wrong.
point is I don't want to have us be categorical and saying it has to come from us. That's we don't know what's going on. You do. You understand the environment. There are certain things that I'm sure that any food technologist or food scientist is going to say yes, you absolutely need to find out what's going on before you do anything further. And hopefully there's some kind of threshold we can put forward to say if it's a food quality issue, this is what you need to do. As soon as it goes into the food safety side of things, the expert has been identified and knows that something may be coming their way and they're going to need to respond quickly, that there's some kind of prioritization system we can put into place. Hey, Rufino, I know you're busy working on country guidance for blah, 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 but this has to be dealt with now.
Has Rufino got any assistant, or
He does. There's
still
actually...
a one-man army?
Well, he's about a 1.5 person army at this point. Somebody, I think one of our foreign service officers is going to be supporting him for a while. But, for those that haven't heard, there's a major reorganization going on inside the agency, of which Food for Peace and OFTA are a major part. And we're hoping with that to be able to, kind of plus up some of those teams that really need it.
Because that has been a challenge, because he has been pulled
He's
in
the only
so
person
many
really-
different
Right.
directions.
No,
And that's not sustainable, obviously.
No, and we've already talked about that. We've already talked and put a few things into place to get some personal services contractors assigned to him. But for those that may know how the agency hiring process works, I mean, it can take 6 months just to get an offer letter out to somebody. It can take 6 months to get security clearance after that. So it's
Right.
8 months.
Right.
No amount of foresight is going to enable you to short circuit that
Right.
process. It's
But
just-
I think where the idea of doing the process mapping, I think, would be excellent. We've been working, as you know, with on the food aid quality review project, and one piece of it is we, did a cursory review of this feedback loop, as well as some other feedback loops and food safety feedback loops that the U.S. government uses, and WSP, and what are some of the things that work and don't work. And we've at least started out with a streamlined questionnaire that could be
There is a
easily...
question there online.
Yeah. So at any rate, as part of this, I think the process mapping would be really, really essential.
I mean, we're not creating something new here.
No,
I mean,
it is
this
not.
This is something
Yeah.
that
But I
I
think-
think we have. I thought Jennifer from Adesia. I mean, this is her world.
Right.
That this is what they focus on. That I think we can probably take a few pieces out of playbooks from companies that have been doing this. This is their lifeblood. We then have to add in the context of what it means out in the field and in the warehouses and in the distributions to kind of shore up
Yeah.
some of those gaps. This is not. We're
It's
not
not
going to
rough,
create
right.
the wheel here, folks.
No.
But
This is-
also the whole U.S. government, the whole Food Safety Modernization Act
Yeah.
has come into play, and all the companies have to adhere to that, including the DJs and other companies that are producing. So, and it's all about prevention, and so that you don't have to react. And of course, occasionally you do have to react, and you do a recall or whatever. But
But there's
to
a plan to do
minimize the maximize everything that happens on the prevention side, and I think this is kind of
Yeah.
that mentality.
And I know Rufino's done a few trips out to go look at warehouses and has had some ideas on paper around some of the things he would like to see done inside of that whole supply chain at the receiving end that may follow some of those HACCP principles. I don't know how applicable it would be
Right.
directly, but there's probably some things that are connected enough to do that.
Let me answer Matt's question.
What? Yep.
Uh,
We have.
Matt, your question was if TOPS is planning to do some more training of the new people on these issues. I think a little while ago we talked about doing some kind of wider consultation within the community to know exactly why they are not using it, and if the current process is cumbersome, how can we simplify the process so it makes it more user-friendly.
And make it
So at
meaningful.
this point, we are not at a stage where we would be talking about more training. I think it is to know more from the community why they are not using it currently as it stands and how we can simplify it.
Right.
I think the training side will come in once the process has been developed
Right.
and rolled out.
Right.
There'll be some consultation to get to that point at least. I think something that I can do is go back and look at all the development programs we have active now, who are the implementing partners and where are they, and start to ask that question, or maybe a series of short questions. Hey, we're trying to breathe some new life into this process that desperately needs it. We want your input on, were you aware that this thing even exists?
Right.
If so, why isn't it being used?
Why don't we work on a questionnaire that will be common that you can use, I can use to
Right.
reach out to our
Well,
community?
honestly, I think you guys are in a better place to develop those questions than I am.
We've already done
Okay,
some of
so
that,
perfect.
and
then
I can talk with
my-
you about that.
My
Okay?
takeaway will be to identify, all the current programs and then figure out how to get message to the right people inside those organizations, which, to be honest, again, you guys probably know them better than I do as far as, do we need to go all the way down to the field level? Like, probably so.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because the weakest link is getting the feedback back from the homes, from the consumers, and that's usually
Right.
more of a food quality issue, but.
And then the other thing I would want to throw out there is I don't want to have parallel processes running between what partners are already using and what we've been talking about today. It may not be perfectly integrated, but if we can avoid people having to duplicate and enter the same information twice in two different places, now that's going to present some process and IT challenges, but we really don't want to have to put new requirements on implementing partners on the ground. If you're already doing something that's headed in that direction that we can borrow from, so much the better. It's like we talked a little bit about requiring something. I mean, our ability to...
When we are at the stage of doing the new process mapping thing, we may look at the DMCR format itself.
That's it,
All
absolutely.
yes.
Right.
The
all of those.
questionnaire,
What-
everything.
Yeah, what FAQR has developed, what we've been working on internally, which is again more losses and damages related, but it all ties together at some
Absolutely.
point. So
I think Matt has got a very good suggestion and a question. Can we address that?
So on the POCs for the issues, can we name a title who is responsible for the FFP reaction to commodity issues for both USDA, USAID, and have a generic email that goes to that responsible individual? That means it will be someone from your office, I guess.
You can have it come
So-
to us for now.
Yeah, well, the
No.
complicating part in that is the both USDA and USAID,
Two different.
there can't be one email that hits. Their agencies are all run independently. So
But
what
if
I
you
can
go to-
do
Yeah.
is talk to somebody on the USDA side and say, if you're
Mhm.
comfortable with it, I'm happy to do that. I'm
Mhm.
happy to have that, and I'll make sure that Nick or whomever on the USDA side is aware of what's going on. But
On,
yeah,
on the contractual side, the agencies have the relationship with Food for Peace, not with USDA directly.
Right.
What I'm thinking is for the USDA programs that have many of the same implementing
Right.
partners doing virtually the same type
Right.
of things, give me your list.
Right.
Mhm.
And if you're comfortable with me reaching out with CC to whoever on the USDA side to say, let's handle this all
Mhm.
together, that I'm sure I can find somebody on one of my teams to kind of help keep track of all this, and it is
Right.
kind of coming into the same place.
I think Matt
Yeah,
has,
I could definitely say
Matt has
email.
corrected his thoughts, so yeah, I think
One
that's,
email for each
Yeah.
So
agency, yeah.
what I'll do is reach out to the FAS side, and I'll probably go pretty high up at first, because
Mhm.
if I don't,
Mhm.
it will not go well.
Yeah.
And explain what we're trying to do. And we're wanting to hit the same implementing partners in the same countries
Mhm.
that you guys are working on this exercise as those that we're trying to reach. So we've talked to everybody, at least given
Mhm.
them the opportunity. And then you guys will help develop the questions if they're not
Right.
already ready to roll, and then get those sent out. So
Mhm.
I need to...
I don't mind helping out from this
Uh-huh.
side, but once it is done, and also there's a good opportunity for me, because I'm going to Malawi and
Right,
get
I'd
the
like to
full
ask you
insight,
to-
and
Yeah.
then share it with
Yeah.
TOPS, and TOPS
Yeah.
can be the focal point. Is that okay, or shall we?
Well, we'd
Yeah.
like, let's.
I'm the center of attraction.
Yeah, I
He's
can
the
see
center of
that.
a-
No,
of
no,
all
no, no,
activity
yeah,
related
so
to
I can,
food.
we can forward it so that you can channel
Yeah.
to, okay, good.
Yeah,
That's-
and
that's
I'll,
good.
I'll be happy to put
Yeah.
my
Mhm.
email out
Perfect.
there as like, this is
Mhm.
where everybody
Perfect.
should send things.
Right.
Mhm.
There's
Well-
probably a good possibility it will be somebody else on one of my teams
Right.
who's
Yeah.
gonna be doing this.
Wonderful.
But I'm pretty sure I know who I would ask to do
Mhm.
this when I get back.
Well, we can also be some of the conduit for some of the information on the food safety side
So-
and all of that. So let's talk about how we can combine, because we're just about to pilot test this questionnaire, and maybe we'll do something different, slightly different based on what the needs are. We could also
Right.
start the process.
Did
mapping at
Agathe
the
also
same
look
time.
at these forms? Because at one point I remember
We talked with you.
talking to, that she was also looking at these forms.
Well,
Wait,
Did you,
yeah, no, that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
that was with Leah,
Uh-huh.
and we're kind of now, we've, as I said, revised the questionnaire as a way to get things started, but.
Someone from DRC has
Mhm.
joined.
Yeah, from FH.
Yeah, can we ask him if he has any input from DRC on the quality issues from Food for the Hungry?
Yeah.
Yes, I think this is a question for Doreen.
Uh-huh. What did she say? She didn't say anything. Darren, have you faced any commodity quality issues in your work? She can also use the chat box if she
Mhm.
wants.
Mm-hmm. And I see Matt has also mentioned having performance metrics on how quickly these things are addressed.
That's more
So,
internal.
yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
Yeah.
Depends on the issue. And, the other thing is that you need to sort of, I think with these things, there's a dollar amount trigger.
Mm.
If you take that, maybe people aren't following it because they're not filing, because there isn't
Yeah,
a certain
the
amount
threshold
of
hasn't
loss.
been crossed.
The threshold needs to be
I'm not real,
removed.
I would,
No, the thing is that there are two things. One is that we always insist loss report should be filed for each and every loss,
Mhm.
immaterial of the value.
Mhm.
Right.
DMCR has a threshold,
Mhm.
but other than that, they have to report all the losses.
Yeah. Anything food quality and food safety needs to
has
be
to be
documented
reported.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Whether it
Right.
has to be reported to whom,
Right.
we can figure out that side of
Right.
things.
But
But
it definitely needs
What
to-
we do
to
not
come back.
have
Mhm.
any mechanism, I know it can be very big system requirement, is that all the different DMCs that come from all these different countries, can we segregate by the loss type?
Type of loss.
Because right now, if you
Yeah,
need
we've
that
got a
information,
database.
you have to
They
go
don't
to
have
each
to-
one of those
they don't have
and
a database.
decipher each one of those. It doesn't automatically get segregated by the type of loss.
Right.
Some can be tapped, some can
so
be.
that
Right.
it gets into what is quicker
But that's,
able to
Right.
to do.
right.
And
And
I-
that's only quarterly reported, so. it's-
Quicker captures that information,
No.
but after that, the
Right.
analysis doesn't happen.
Right.
Exactly, it's just kind of sitting there. So
Right.
I think that gets again to that process map,
Yeah.
that it's, to Deep's point earlier about like, this gets in, is it a
Mhm.
loss, is it damages?
Exactly.
Right.
What is the end result?
End
What
result.
happens
And what are you
Right.
supposed to
if,
do
if
about
there
it?
was a food quality issue and you
Right.
chose for whatever reason to not distribute it, then it goes into, what is it, 211.8, like disposition and how that's getting reported, all that kinds of stuff. That it
Mhm.
has to connect back to all those
Because
other
right
pieces.
now, we don't have a sense of the magnitude of the problem,
Mhm.
because we do not have the desegregated data.
Right, that's exactly the issue that USAID has,
Yeah.
and that's why this is all,
Yeah.
being addressed right now, especially with the changing,
So-
the upgrading of the food basket and
Right.
more local and regional purchase coming on and things like that,
So
eventually.
It really comes down to what's the scope of what we're talking about. What do we really want to accomplish with this? And it sounds like it's much broader.
It is
Then-
broader, but I think
Mhm.
let us break it down and take one step at a time.
No, absolutely, but let's identify all
Yeah.
of those places. And like, we may not get to this part for a few years because it's just not a high enough priority, but it does need to be built into that whole process,
Mhm.
especially if you're going to talk about IT systems and if you're developing business
Yeah.
requirements now for something that you're not going to use for a while. It has to be built into there, because if you
Mhm.
don't,
Right.
it's going to cost so much money
Yeah.
to kind of fit something in at the
Mhm.
tail end. So it just, where
Where you're at.
to me, it's really, this is a supply chain management issue.
Mhm.
From start to finish, from planning of what's going to be put into a country and into distribution till the time it's consumed or wherever that food ended up. That's kind of the scope of what we're talking about here. There may not be implications in this part or wherever, but we probably should look through that whole supply chain
Mhm.
to making sure that, we can trace things back not only to supplier, but what was the agreement that was used to sign that with the partner, like all those things. You never know where it's going to come, and since most of that data is available somewhere,
It is there somewhere, but
it's just not
yeah.
not connected.
But also we need
Hi,
to
Greg.
clarify our,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Hi, Greg. This is Jennifer from Adicia. I just wanted to interject a couple of quick comments kind of about the scope of what we're talking about here. So it sounds like I'm kind of hearing two purposes of this document. One would be to kind of identify from the field perspective of once you identify some product or commodity that has an issue, one is the immediate kind of concern of whether or not this product can be distributed or not. But the second is kind of like a more longer term perspective to get more details about what actually happened to the commodity and how can you maybe prevent that in the future. So that's what some of these questions on the questionnaire kind of get to get a better understanding of what may have happened in the supply chain. And I think both of those objectives are really useful for this questionnaire. Yeah, for very different reasons. So the first one,
Go ahead.
yeah, so the first one that you mentioned, can the commodity actually be used? And I think what you mentioned here about food technologists being engaged with this process is really useful. And I know, at least from our perspective, you identified like some things that we could tell the field staff, like if you see these problems, it is cause for concern. But I would suggest to even maybe take it a step further to say, if you see these problems, this is how you investigate it further. So for example, from our perspective, we would if there is some type of, if you identify rancidity, for example, there are some tests that we would suggest that you do on the product to know if it is still good or not. And so if those tests can be done in the field, that's one option. And if they can't, to be able to send the sample somewhere that can, or that we could test retains or something like that. So I think one is to say, to help identify the problem, but we could also go a step further to already help them to start to find a solution. So that could maybe be one way in which our food technologists and nutritionists could give some insight as well about for our products in particular. But I think the second piece of this, the purpose and scope of this questionnaire is really important as well, related to supply chain, as you mentioned, because I think the more we know about how the damages happened, the more we can make modifications to the process in the future and our products and how they are built and shipped, then I think we could also in the future help to use this document then to prevent or to make a more robust product and process to prevent damages in the future.
Yeah, so thank you. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head on a couple of fronts, that it shouldn't just be here's the process and here's what you have to do inside of it. There needs to be more guidance built into that, that coming from the right people. I know who was the main author or the authors of this one, and I don't think at that time there was a food technologist, and that perspective was not included in this. And that was the first thing after, Chops kindly sent me my own document, and reading through that, and it's not. So I'm assuming somebody in the field would have no guidance around what they're supposed to be looking for, and that's just a bad place to be, because you're already, having to react to things. So I would fully agree that this needs to be just as much process and procedure as it is guidance and advice on how to kind of proceed through both the procedural side and what to actually do inside the warehouse or inside the distributions. So we can cover all those things. I am starting to get a little concerned around the scope of what we're talking about and the time frames in which we're going to be able to address these. So we may want to think about the longevity of this project as well. As there are phases to this here. We're just identifying the problem now. Then we're going to move into some possible solutions. Then we're going to move into the process mapping. And we as an office, Food for Peace, can continue that process with whoever those stakeholders might be. But I just want to make sure that we're not biting off so much now that we're just not going to be able to, see it to the finish line.
I agree.
I think in 6 months you can easily get the feedback and do the process mapping and test out maybe this simplified questionnaire and platform of ways to get the information back easily. If we can work together on these things, that's
I think it's definitely doable, but I think we also have to be very mindful of what else are we doing, and how does this fit in, and where are the priorities. The constant thing that I always hear from everybody involved in this work is, I got 5 other things I should be doing on top of the 10 I am.
He has nothing else to do.
No, we have some ability to do this right now.
I think having a plan and being smart about it, instead of in Food for Peace fashion, just shoving the whole go handle this. Never works.
Yeah, we have a pilot project.
Okay.
That's how these things were rolled out. It was just.
No, this thing took, this took 2 or 3 years to develop, and then it was never rolled out because it was so complicated.
Well, no,
it was rolled out, but it didn't serve
it was not well adopted, I think.
It wasn't served.
But also we have to recognize the fact that bottom line is the accountability. Who we should hold accountable for this cause. Now, for example,
at which side?
No, that's what I'm saying. For example, the issue with the CSP that we had, mass scale, large scale issue, automatically directed us to find out who are the supplier, what happened. Another scenario is 4 bags of corn found mold in it. That's not supplier. That has something to do with the warehouse management.
Exactly.
You get my point.
Right.
So this also, we have to keep both into perspective so that we can channel out who we can hold accountable. And this would be a good opportunity to say, if we have to dispose 4 bags or 5 bags, we have to justify what was the cause of it and admit that, well, we kept it under the, exposed under the rain and whatever.
Yeah.
So USDA doesn't have to worry about, is that something to do with the supply? No, it has something to do with our internal management. So
And it'll help your
yeah,
management get
exactly,
better.
exactly.
Being able to link it back to all the surveys and the inspections that are
Exactly.
done from supplier's plant in
Right.
North Dakota
Right.
all the way until it got, because all of that documentation is available. And often what you see is like, okay, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good. Big gap in reporting,
Right.
it was bad.
Right.
So at least
Right.
you have some way of
Some-
knowing,
exactly.
I don't have to go back to the very beginning of the process.
Right.
That everything,
It's there. Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
another part of this process
Yeah.
that we've talked about a little bit. So I know we're
Greg?
about an hour in right now.
Greg, this is Kane on the phone. I just do have one question from the phone, and this kind of builds on Adib's scale statement there about whether it's 4 bags or something larger. I think it would be helpful to kind of find out from you, how frequent are you actually experiencing these large-scale issues? Because, I mean, the green CSB thing, I can't remember exactly how many years ago, but I want to say it was a good long time ago. So,
Long time ago, a lot of the producer processes are
Right.
much more,
they're refined.
the quality control is much better.
Yeah, and I'm curious, I mean, it's something that goes in excess of the 4 bags or even an entire container full. I mean, what is it, how frequent are you actually experiencing these types of things? I mean, we just went through one, we being Save the Children on the USDA side, and it was quite large. It was an entire consignment. It was, almost 500 metric tons. So, but I'm curious from the FFP side, how frequently are you guys experiencing the supplier side issues?
The only part we can really talk about with any detail is what we send to the pre-positioning warehouses, because we're not privy to any of those contracts with anybody else. We know, we talk to WFP, they happen. There's not been a lot of food quality or food safety issues. It's more of like damages in packaging due to somebody didn't block and brace their containers kinds of stuff. That happens pretty regularly. We've seen a sharp decline in the number of incidents where USDA has come to us and said, hey, the supplier is out of spec. The iron content is 0.2% higher than the spec allows. There used to be a lot of that, and I kind of would connect that directly back to having a food technologist who's now engaged with all that. That's where I've noticed that, I used to be responsible for maintaining a spreadsheet of all those incidents, and, I was sometimes the one deciding, is this going to go forward or not? Is it within a threshold?
Right.
But I don't do that one anymore. So to answer your question is, it's still pretty common that there are issues that come up, but it's more focused on damages resulting from transportation or out of spec coming out of a supplier's plant. Beyond that, we don't see a whole lot.
Okay. Well, and the reason I say that is not to add more to the long list of things that you already said you have to do, but we do, we learn well from example. And so for everyone, when we talk about food safety, inevitably someone's going to talk about green CSB, but it would be good to get a better handle on what it looks like in the reality, be it, finding metal shavings in something or being out of spec for fortification or transportation issues. What are we actually seeing in real life? So, like I said, I don't want to add to your weight, to your work weight, but it would be great if someone was still doing that type of spreadsheet. It really would help, and you can scrub the information. We don't want to necessarily know the PVO's name or the supplier's name, but it would be helpful for those of us who are practitioners to say, like, oh, okay, these are the things, in fact, to be looking out for.
There have been some substantial food quality issues. I think it was Madagascar either last year or the year before, where there was a larger amount of foreign matter or dockage inside that sorghum when it arrived in the country, and the government was going to say, like, sorry, this is just unacceptable, which it was. So we had to go back to USDA and rewrote the spec to lower that dockage down. Their fear was that suppliers then were going to drastically raise their prices because they'd have to clean things a little bit better. Well, lo and behold, no change in price at all. So, I mean, it does get to that point of having that historical view of what's happened and knowing how to deal with things is kind of what I'm gathering from your point is there's a bigger perspective that needs to be taken into account that maybe it does get into some cost savings issues, where we're able to do things that are going to actually save us some money in the long run by having a more robust and understanding used process to record throughout the supply chain. So I don't want to
Yep.
harp on the supply chain side too much. I think that's a bigger piece we have to be mindful of, but it's just one component of what this project may end up looking like.
And the practitioner should also recognize the fact that it has to do with reputation. Because we don't want to distribute food and then we get feedback that people are getting sick. So
Yep.
this is a prevention and this is very important, and this is something that I really advocate, that getting a commodity apparently looks good is not enough. That's why we have to inform the beneficiary if there's any doubt about the quality or whatever, report to us, where the complaint mechanism comes in, so that we can follow up on, it could be one bag, it could be more than that, but it's a matter of health issue. So, which would boil down on the reputation, because they know that it's coming from the people of America, but we are the one who's giving it out. So we have to protect our credibility. So there's a lot of things that is involved.
So everybody is invested
Exactly.
from all sides in
Exactly.
making
Exactly.
something that's
Exactly.
going to be streamlined and work better.
Correct.
Yeah, just a quick question. If you mentioned local and regional purchase, when you have a project in which a partner is proposing to do local purchase, to meet a commodity need in a particular project for commodity purpose, how will this process be adaptable to that as well?
I would hope that we
If
could.
they're using the USAID money, then it
Yes.
works like
Yeah.
that.
And to my knowledge, where possible, they're always trying to adhere to the same standards of what would have been
Right.
produced in
So there
the
needs to be
United States.
personnel, there need to be trained personnel available to be able to
Yeah.
perform some of those quality
Well,
testing that
that's-
happens with the
Well, that's a whole
supplier.
different,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a different thing.
But it is, to answer your question, from my experience in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, we have built into our procurement contract or sales contract, these are the requirements, this is what, if there's any issue with the quality, safety and quality, that must be replaced with no, so it all depends on how we
And
draft our
And
contract.
also what
So-
Jack said, like if the language is inserted into the
right,
Our,
into the
yeah.
contract.
into the contract
Agreement.
agreement itself,
Right.
then it becomes binding on the
Binding.
And then if you do that, you can also, which country you're going to be dealing with, and so you can also take into account the laws and regulate the food regulations of those countries. And that's always something that,
Sometimes the rules and regulations in the countries change so often, it has to come from the partner, because they are present in the
but
country.
they are going to
Yeah.
have to
They're-
deal with that.
In combination with the mission staff,
Right.
that's the approach that I've tried to emphasize. Is
Yeah.
I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on the ground. I know
Exactly.
there are times where this is what the law actually says, but
Mm.
this is what the guy at the customs office is actually doing,
Yeah.
and they don't line up.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's like having somebody on the
The
ground who
non-tariff trade
understands
barrier.
current circumstances is a big part of
on
this.
another scenario, just for everybody's information, in Mali, for example, there's a local procurement that goes on of Mizola, which is produced locally. And HKI is contracted under the same agreement with award agreement and contracted by USAID to ensure the safety, quality, and hygiene, because it's locally produced in different regions. So yes, that emphasis is given, and that is recognized by Food for Peace, and fund is allocated. So one is providing by the vendor, another is so we need to make sure that those are all incorporated in our agreement, that they have to assure the safety and quality.
So are those agreements that you have with the local and regional purchase, are those standard agreements? Are there any kinds of clauses in there that?
I haven't seen a standard agreement,
No,
but
there is
I
no
have
standard
agreement.
Each
So,
organization, they
yeah.
their own.
yeah, I did it because
Right.
based on to protect our risk
Right.
and liabilities,
Right.
and even so much so in that scenario in Tajikistan,
Right.
it was built in that they will deliver and stack it in our warehouse, and if there is any shortfall, or they will replace it. So what happened is that they brought additional bags with them in case, and that was agreed upon, so there was no losses until we took the possession. So it's how you protect and prevent your own,
Right.
so it all varies from
Okay, we are little over 1 hour. If there is anything pressing, shall we talk about it or we talk about the next step?
Mhm.
Okay, so if
I think the DRC raised an issue about fumigation, but I don't think that is the kind of
That's
quality,
not-
and that's not
no,
what they're
that's
talking about, so maybe
that's
we want to
Yeah,
let them know.
yeah,
That's
Darin,
not
we
what-
took your point,
Yeah.
but I think the fumigation service providers is not within the
It's
scope of
not-
what we
yeah,
are
that we're talking
discussing
about.
now.
Not right
But-
now.
No.
Yeah, but we know that that is an issue in DRC. So next step is that we'll work on a questionnaire that will be common that you can use and we can use for the partners, because we have got a big database of all the commodity people in the task force. And we'll gather that information and then consolidate that, and then probably a smaller group we should meet and then discuss what we get from that feedback. And we'll take it from there.
Okay. Yeah, so my follow-ups are to identify who on my team I'm going to ask to kind of coordinate this process.
Yeah.
Get names, or at least partners that we have in all the different country programs, and run that by you guys, and hopefully you can help us. Like, this is the actual person that is best suited to handle that. And then I'll talk to USDA as well about their comfort with us,
Yeah.
kind of doing this on their behalf if they're not able to, find somebody to participate, or if they even want to. If they just don't, like, that's fine. We're still going to go ahead and
When you say USDA, are you talking about
FAS.
McGovern Dole and
Yeah.
Food for Progress?
Right. But
They
you're,
need
but
all the help they can get.
they
Well,
certainly.
They have nothing.
At the moment, they
I wouldn't
really
quite say
do.
nothing. I know circumstances are a bit difficult on that end right now, so if there's ways we can help out without having to
Yeah,
put too
why
much
not?
work
Yeah.
on them, it
Right.
doesn't make any sense to have two people contact the same person to ask the same question.
But I think there's.
And my
as
approach
well,
to
so-
all this is that no matter which channel food goes out through, ultimately it is the U.S. government
Oh.
resources.
Yeah, but also USDA purchases most of it.
Yeah.
There are some things that USAID is purchasing at the moment, but mostly it
Well,
comes
yeah,
out of
I think we're going to have to
Kansas City.
be mindful of the scope of this. Are we going to actually start talking about LRP now, or is it something that needs to be included
I
in the
think that would
planning?
be phased.
Yeah.
But thinking about it is very important. I think that's
Right.
that's important.
I think it's that scoping exercise
Right.
followed by the actual process mapping. Here's all the things we need to consider. Here's what we're going to actually consider now, and here's phase 2, phase 3 down the road. Kind of thing.
And that's better. I think we should focus on the U.S. import and then import into our host country, and then
Right,
learn from that and see how we can
exactly,
build on the LRP and other.
exactly.
So in the meanwhile, I'm committing myself because this is perfect timing because this issue has come up for my performance review.
When are
of
you
the
going to Malawi?
27th of August.
Perfect.
27th of August.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have time. If we come up with the questionnaire,
Yeah.
you can go with that questionnaire.
With questionnaire and build on it, and also on this questionnaire and the.
Well,
Yeah,
I'd like to see if
go
we
through
could
this thing.
pilot this one. I
While
mean,
I
this
would-
might be the right thing.
Let us not mix
It
up
might-
before even
yeah.
we
Yeah,
discuss.
and I would
Right.
also request those who are on the line, other cooperating sponsors should also see how they can also work together, and I'll be providing you with my input so that it's channeled to the right person, so that's fine.
Okay.
Good.
So,
Okay. Well, thank you to those
Thank
on the
you.
phone, especially
Thank you.
those that are staying up later in their evening to participate in this. We really appreciate that.
Shahidul has just joined. Shahidul, you are late.
It's time difference.
Exactly.
10 hours.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. All the best.
All right.
Okay. Can you disconnect?